King Lawrence, the alarm clock. Lawrence was very proud. He was, of course, king of his part of the forest. But this was not why he was so proud. For Lawrence was more than a king. He was also an alarm clock. He had the loudest roar of any creature of the forest. Every morning when he woke up, Lawrence opened his mouth wide, and out came a roar. A roar that shook the leaves of the trees, a roar that echoed back from the cliffs, a roar that woke up all the creatures in King Lawrence's part of the forest. Lawrence's first loud roar came at dawn. All of the creatures woke up, but some went straight back to sleep. Not, however, the creatures of the forest who liked to play, but hated to fight, for the first roar meant it was their time to go down to the water hole. So the deer, the rabbits, the mice, the monkeys, the giraffes, the gazelles, and all the other friendly forest creatures woke up and hurried down to the water hole. Some were tall and some were small, so small they were hardly there at all. Some were fat, some were flat, some could crawl and some could fly. Some walked and some just slithered by, but all were very friendly. When they got to the water hole, they drank, they played, they washed, they sprayed, they ate grass, leaves, nuts, and no one was ever afraid because none of these first alarm creatures ever ate each other. When the sun started climbing high in the sky, Lawrence opened his mouth very wide and let out another roar. All the friendly creatures hurried away from the water hole and hid. Then King Lawrence, the alarm clock, let out two loud roars. This time, all the fierce creatures in the forest woke up and went down to the water hole. There were tigers and lions, leopards and lynxes, rhinoceri and hippopotami, cheetahs and crocodile, cobras and boas, constrictors, buzzards, even bees. Some walked, some stalked, some swam, some slithered, some swooped through the sky, but all were very fierce, and none were very friendly. When these two alarm creatures reached the water hole, they drank, they washed, they played, they fought, but it was always a fairly fair fight, because some had very sharp teeth, some had very long claws, some could sting, and some were so strong they could squeeze an enemy to death. Each had a special weapon of one kind or another, so all of the two alarm creatures could fight back. At noon, when the sun sat high in the sky, King Lawrence gave another loud two-alarm roar. And all the fierce forest creatures, including King Lawrence himself, left the water hole. At the end of every afternoon, King Lawrence, the alarm clock, opened his mouth wide, and out came roar, roar, roar. The elephants were the three alarm creatures. They were the hugest animals in the forest and the heaviest. They could rip up trees with their trunks. They could trample small creatures with their fat feet. They could fight fiercely with their strong, long tusks. But in fact, they were very friendly. What they liked most of all was to play and to spray each other with water. They sloshed through the water hole and splashed and splashed. They crashed through the bushes on the banks. When the sun sank low in the sky, King Lawrence would roar 3 times. But the elephants hated to leave. Sometimes Lawrence had to give his 3-alarm roar 3 times before the elephants finally obeyed him. One summer morning, King Lawrence woke up shivering. His eyes were red. His nose was hot. He felt terrible. Then he opened his mouth wide to sound his first alarm roar, but all that came out was a whisper. Roar. He tried again. This time there was no whisper. This time there was nothing Lawrence the lion had lost his voice. King Lawrence had laryngitis. All the forest creatures overslept. When each creature finally awoke, he was filled with confusion. He had the alarm clock sounded? Was it time to get up? Yes, the sun was high in the sky. For the first time, the friendly creatures and the fierce creatures all hurried down to the water hole at the same time. A deer and a doe were there drinking peacefully. All of a sudden, a tiger sprang at them. A growling lion chased a llama. An elephant stepped on an eel. The friendly animals shook with fear. Some sped away. Some were too scared to move. The fierce animals were furious. Why were these silly creatures crowding the waterhole at the wrong time? When a little mouse named Myron reached the waterhole, he squeaked, "My goodness, what a mess!" Most of the friendly creatures had fled, but some were dead. The elephants were no longer friendly. They no longer played and sprayed each other with the water. In fact, the waterhole was so crowded, it was hard to see any water. The elephants were charging about, hitting with their trunks, ripping with their tusks. The lions were growling. The tigers were scowling. Everyone was thirsty. No one was happy. There was no more order at all in King Lawrence's part of the forest. And where was King Lawrence? Not at the waterhole. Myron the mouse scampered off to look for the king. He finally found King Lawrence under a tree, shivering and shaking. The king was groaning and moaning, but because of Lawrence's laryngitis, no sound came out at all. "My goodness, your highness!" Myron exclaimed. "Are you sick, sire?" King Lawrence opened one red eye. He gazed at the little mouse and nodded. "Can you speak?" Myron squeaked. "Can't you roar anymore?" Sadly, Lawrence shook his head. "I have an idea. Wait right here," said Myron, and he scampered off. He felt very important giving orders to a king. He ran to the big flat rock by the banyan tree. He peeked beneath it. Yes, the magic moss was still here. He scooped some up, wrapped it in a leaf, and hurried back to the king. "Your Highness," he announced as loudly as he could in his little voice, "this magic moss will cure you." King Lawrence opened both red eyes. He looked at the moss and wrinkled his hot nose. "It may not look too good," said Myron, "but when I was sick and shivering and had lost my squeak, my granny gave me this magic moss, and in 3 days I was better. Try it, your highness," he pleaded. He held the moss close to Lawrence's tongue, and Lawrence licked it up. Then Myron the mouse ran all about, telling every creature he met that King Lawrence the alarm clock had laryngitis. "But," said Myron, "don't worry, the king will be better in 3 days' time." 3 days passed. The king did not grow better. In fact, he grew worse, and so did the confusion in the forest. Then Myron the mouse went to visit his granny. She nodded wisely. "A little mouse only needs a little medicine to make him better," she said. "But a huge lion needs a huge lot of medicine to make him better." "Oh," said Myron. He ran back to the big flat rock, but to get out a lot of the magic moss, he would have to lift up the rock. However, he was too tiny and weak. A huge elephant lumbered by. He was very cross because of all the confusion down at the water hole. "Please, sir," Myron squeaked, "would you shove the rock away with your trunk?" "No," the elephant bellowed crossly. "If you don't, I will scamper Myron squeaked. This frightened the elephant. He stamped his fat feet and almost squashed Myron. And then he shoved the flat rock away, and there lay a huge lot of magic moss, enough to cure a king. Then Myron organized a whole parade of animals. Everyone from ants to zebras helped carry moss to the king. King Lawrence, the alarm clock, lay there licking, chewing, swallowing all of the magic moss medicine the creatures brought him. 3 days later, when King Lawrence woke up, he had stopped shivering. His eyes were no longer red. His nose was no longer hot. He opened his mouth very wide, and out came a very loud roar. All the creatures in King Lawrence's part of the forest woke up and cheered. King Lawrence, the alarm clock, was well. Then the creatures cheered again, and they cheered for the little mouse named Myron who had cured the king. And then the friendly creatures hurried down to the water hole. The fierce creatures went back to sleep, and all was in order once more in King Lawrence's part of the forest. The end.